Hello! A while ago, I bought a set of Daniel Smith secondary colours. I put this in my cupboard and completely forgot about it until now. Well, I decided it would be time to test these out, but not only do I have these three, I decided to buy the primary colour set as well. This one's brand new, I only just bought it a couple of weeks ago. And I've wanted these two sets for a very long time, so I bought them off Amazon. They're actually not too bad priced by comparison to other places I've seen. But wait, there's more. Because those two are old sets as far as I know, and it seems like Daniel Smith has repackaged these with new colours in both sets. I've just put pictures up of what the packaging looks like from some shops I've seen lately. Although at the time of recording, it seems like the original sets are the only ones on Amazon. It's so weird. But anyway, I've managed to get my hands on all of the tubes, and I thought I would swatch them out today and compare them to see how different they actually are, or are they the same? The yellow in the primary set is the same for both of them, but otherwise all of the other colours are different. And looking on Daniel Smith's website, they have both sets actually listed there. The top two are called primary and secondary watercolour sets, and the bottom two, which are the new ones, are called primary and secondary mixing sets. I have no idea what's going on, but anyway, I've got them all and I'm going to try them out right now. So let's get into it. I'll go through each colour and compare them. The original is Perylene Red PR178 and the new one is Carmine, which I was guessing was going to be a cooler red than the Perylene, and this one is PR176. Now the difference between these two is also in the price, because Perylene Red is a more expensive Series 3 and Carmine is Series 2. Up next are the yellows, and I've now got two tubes of Hansa Yellow Medium because I already owned one. This is PY97. I really love this yellow, it's a great one, so I'm happy to have more than one tube. I think I was just checking to make sure they were identical. Now all of the tubes I'm showing today can be purchased individually, and I think for almost all of them there are 5mm tubes as well. These are the larger 15mm tubes. I bought the primary set because it was so much cheaper than buying individual tubes, mainly because the Perylene Red is so expensive. Moving on to the blues, and I had these two in the wrong order. French Ultramarine comes in the original primary set, and that's a PB29, and the new mixing set has Ultramarine Blue, which I pulled out of my stash because I didn't want to buy another one. Although at the rate I'm going through it, I will need to get another soon. Now we come to the secondaries. Quinacridone Burnt Orange was in that trio I showed right at the beginning. This is a P048. It is a discontinued pigment, but from what I hear, Daniel Smith has hoarded a whole bunch of it. In the new mixing set, we have Quinacridone Sienna, which also contains P048, but also contains PY150 and PR209. I already owned Quinacridone Sienna, I haven't used it that much, so I'll be curious to try it again. Next up are greens. Firstly, we have Undersea Green in the original set, which has blue, orange and yellow pigments, and then now we have Sap Green, which has removed the blue pigment and put in a phthalo green instead. You'll see all these numbers again in a while, because I did write them down. I'm just moving faster than I can voice over at the moment. Lastly, we have the purples. Carbazole Violet is the original, and it is a dioxazine purple PV23. And now they have Imperial Purple in the new set. It's totally different. It's a mix of red and blue, so I'll be really curious to compare those two with each other. So I'm just going to organise some of these. I'm taking out that new Hansa Yellow, I don't need that one today. I also have a second Carbazole Violet, so I'll be using the open one, and the same for the Sap Green, because I do have a half-used one. I just had bought another because I really love that colour. I decided to pour my paints into this little porcelain palette, which also has a lid. I already have some of these colours in half pans, but I wanted all of the paint to be fresh today, and my tin of Daniel Smith watercolours is almost full, so it's not actually going to take all of the new colours I have here. I just thought it would be easier to put these separately because I can have a row each for the different trio sets, and I'm going to call them old and new, even though they all seem to be readily available to buy at the moment. I put the same yellow top and bottom just so that I didn't get myself confused, and I made one heck of a mess with some of these because of course a really full tube will often explode when you take the lid off. Some of them behaved themselves very nicely, like this Carmine though. And I'm only putting a little bit out because these paints are very intense usually, and a small amount goes a long way. The most used one is definitely that ultramarine blue. When I first started buying Daniel Smiths, the ultramarine was one of the first that I bought. I just labelled the side there with an O for old and N for new, just so I can remind myself which is which. The great thing with watercolours is, of course, once they dry, they will easily re-wet, so I can keep them in this palette with the lid on, they can dry out, and then I can just activate them again with water. I'd also had this palette for quite a long time, and I wasn't really sure to put in it, so this is really the first time it's properly being used, and I bought it at a local art store. I think it was Senior Art Supplies. But these sorts of palettes are readily available on Amazon as well. If I can find one, I will link it in the description below for you. I think just looking at the palette, the two colours that look most different from each other are the oranges. The quinacridone sienna is a lot brighter than the quinacridone burnt orange. But here I've written everything out, it's very messy. But let's get swatching. I've been absolutely dying to try these colours out. I'll start off with the primaries, and I'm going to wet the paper first for all of them. The first is Perylene Red, PR178, and this is Series 3. It has a light fastness of 1, so it's the highest light fastness you can get. It had come away from the binder a little bit, which is why I'm struggling to get colour on there, but once I got it mixed in, it is a very beautiful, vibrant red. I love this colour a lot. It is leaning towards the warm side just a little bit. And in comparison is Carmine, PR176, very close in number. But the colour of this is considerably different. This is so much cooler and is leaning more towards the blue side like a quinacridone rose. It's a really pretty red too. Although it's not as light fast, it is a light fast 2, and it's the only one in all of these sets that is not light fast 1. Carmine is also a Series 2, so it's cheaper than the Perylene Red. Now both of these are exactly the same. This is Hansa Yellow Medium, Series 2, Light Fast 1, PY97. It's an excellent yellow, right in the middle. It's not too cool and not too warm. I use this one a lot in my palette, so having 2 tubes is not a problem for me. And now we come to the ultramarines. First is French Ultramarine, PB29, Series 2, Light Fast 1. A very lovely blue, tending towards the warmer side though. And this can be a little bit awkward for mixing greens, but we'll come to that in a while. It is a really beautiful colour on its own though. I do like an ultramarine. It's one of those traditional blues that everyone has in their palettes pretty much. And let's try ultramarine blue. This is one I've had in my collection for a very long time. Also PB29, but it's cheaper at a Series 1, and it has a light fastness of 1. Going on price, the 3 tubes in the new set are cheaper than the old set. But I'm going to switch over to the secondary colours because I also want to see what these look like. We've got quinacridone burnt orange with that discontinued PO48. It's a Series 2 and a light fastness of 1. So for all of these colours you expect them to remain light fast. This is a very muted orange. It's got that rusty look to it. Almost like a burnt sienna, but just a bit more orange. And I'm only just realising now that I'm swatching these in the wrong order. I did the olds first and then the news. Good one, Becky! So we'll move on to Undersea Green. This one has 3 pigments, PB29, PO48 and PY150. It's a Series 1 and is also light fast 1. It's an interesting mix. It's also quite a muted green. And I think it's the PO48 orange which is making it that really sort of neutrally kind of colour. Last is Carbazole Violet. This is such an intense colour. I've only got a tiny bit of paint on my brush here, but adding on some more, you can see how deep that mass tone is. Dioxazine violets are usually really vibrant like this, so it can be a little hard to water down sometimes. Okay, going to the new ones. Quinacridone Sienna in comparison to Quinacridone Burnt Orange. This is also Series 2 and Light Fast 1, but it has 3 pigments and it is a lot brighter. Along with the PO48, they've also mixed in PR209 and PY150. Competing with Undersea Green is Sap Green. It should be 3 pigments there, I forgot to write one down. PO48, PY150 and PG7, which is that phthalo green blue shade. Daniel Smith's version is my all-time favourite Sap Green. It is such a beautiful colour. And last up, competing with Carbazole Violet, is Imperial Purple. This is PV19 and PB29. And I think I got in a bit of green in the water, so I just wiped it off and started again there, so that I don't corrupt the colour. And we'll add this one on. I noticed that Imperial Purple is nowhere near as intense as Carbazole Violet, but it's almost the same colour, which is quite interesting. Maybe just a little more red than the Carbazole Violet, but otherwise very similar to each other, at least until they dry. We'll see that in a moment. Here's the lid to the paint palette. I found it. So let's take a look at them now they're fully dry. And it's quite interesting in that they are quite similar to each other, but there are also some differences. So I'm just going to hold this up a little bit closer so we can see them. Looking at the primaries first, the yellow's the same, but that French ultramarine is so much more granulating than the ultramarine blue. It's the same pigment, but one is obviously milled finer than the other. The perylene red is also warmer than the carmine. And I'll just flip them around so we can see them side by side. Maybe you can see how the carmine is pinker than the perylene red there. This is going to change orange and purple mixes for sure. The yellow is identical, and then here we can see that French ultramarine is just really granulating, whereas the ultramarine blue is a lot smoother. So, depending on whether you like granulation or not, that may factor into which blue you'd want to have. And of course you can mix and match these if you buy individual tubes as well. Let's take a look at the secondary colours. And once again, these are quite similar, but they're also very different as well, weirdly enough. The new set feels a lot more vibrant to me than the old set does. I'll flip them around sideways so we can take a look at each colour. The quinacridone burnt orange is definitely more muted than the quinacridone sienna. The sienna is a much brighter redder orange. This is also the same. Undersea green is more muted than sap green, but undersea also has some really lovely granulation. And then the two violets, carbazole's quite a flat colour, whereas imperial purple has split out into the two pigments, and it's also very granulating thanks to that ultramarine blue in there. Or the French ultramarine. I'll just zoom in on the granulating ones. All three of them is because of PB29, this French ultramarine. It's a fairly coarse pigment, and so it creates this interesting granulation. It's happening again in the undersea green, and it's split out a little bit from that orange as well, which is just around the edges. It's also really noticeable in the imperial violet, and I love how that other pinky violet colour has come out as well around the edges. That's so pretty. I love this colour. I think it's really gorgeous. So that's what they all look like on the first impression swatch. But I'm going to paint a few colour wheels in here, or at least try to. I'm not very good at doing this, but I thought it would be fun to mix them together and see what we can come up with. So I'm starting off with the primary colours. I completely forgot to wet the paper first, so I'm really struggling to mix them here. I decided to do the same for both of the primary circles just so that they stay as close to each other as possible. But ultramarine blue is one of those colours that doesn't make the brightest of greens because it really is too warm a blue, and that warmish perylene red is also making a slightly more muted purple, not a bright one, but the red mixes in with the yellow to make a lovely warm orange. So going in with the cooler carmine with the yellow, it still makes a fairly decent orange, although it's not quite as bright. The purple between the ultramarine and carmine is definitely a bit brighter and cooler. It's really hard to tell on this because I was struggling so much to mix. I am going to put some extra little mixes shortly, but I'll just do these secondary colours, and I remembered to put the water on so they're flowing so much more nicely into each other. But when all of these secondaries mix together, they make some very interesting neutral colours in browns and greyish tones. It's not so obvious on these ones, but what is obvious is how much brighter these three colours are, and they do look quite different to the top ones when mixed together as well. So I'm just adding in those mixes because it's just easier to mix them on top of each other rather than trying to create a seamless gradient. And of course it's very difficult to get an exact ratio between each colour, but I did my best, and these are the mixes that I ended up with. Some colours tend to be more dominant than others, so it does take a little while to get a decent mix going. But I am definitely seeing differences between the top and bottom ones. That could just be me mixing them differently as well. And then on the secondaries, I'm getting very neutral tones. And you can see how the primary and the secondary sets make entirely different mixes to each other, so they're totally different colour palettes. And depending on your preferences, you may prefer one palette over the other. Of course, you could put them all in the one palette together and have all of these colours going, with infinite colour mixing possibilities. I didn't do a full mixing chart, but here are the dried colour wheels along with the mixes I got from each pair of colours. I feel like the new colours are maybe just a bit more vibrant than the old ones. Love that purple. The carmine is a great one to mix with the ultramarine. I do love that perylene red too as well though, it's a lovely red. And going over here, once again, the new ones are also more vibrant than the old ones. And there's a lot more granulation going on in that purple area. But all of the colours from both sets are really nice, and check out the granulation in that one, it's amazing. Of course not everyone likes granulation, so don't go and pick that Imperial Purple, or the Undersea Green, or the French Ultramarine. Have I got time for a painting? Of course I do, and I'm painting on Canson Moulin du Roi 100% cotton cold press watercolour paper. Starting with the background, I covered the paper in plain water, and now I'm dropping the paint on top in a wet on wet technique because this paper disperses the paint beautifully. I let this dry overnight along with the paints because it's just easier to work with them when they're dry, and I'm adding a heavier layer of both of the purples and the greens, just kind of mixing them all together. And even though purple and green kind of clash together, they worked out well, and there are muted areas along with stronger purple and green parts. And once I let that dry again, it's time to work on the eagle itself. I found this picture on an AI website and I thought it was quite neat, but I have gone a totally different colour scheme. This ended up being far more rainbow than I ever intended it to be, but I was just having a lot of fun playing with these paints and dropping them into each other, so I wasn't really doing a lot of mixing on the palette, I was doing it more on the paper. And I really wanted to showcase all of the colours rather than have dull mixes. Because you know me, I love my bright colours, and even with this fairly limited palette of colours, it was astonishing how many different variations I could get by letting the paints mix together with each other. That carmine is particularly intense. I had such a great time painting this. I always forget how wonderful Daniel Smith paints are until I use them again, and then I'm reminded every time of their quality. They did not disappoint me in this painting session either. They really are fabulous paints. I'm so happy with this painting, sometimes the rainbow just comes out. But let's take a closer look at it so you can see some of the granulation, because it is quite prominent in some areas. Some of the colours are fairly smooth, but anything with that French ultramarine pigment in it will have granulation, and I've managed to get a bit of a mix of both granulating and smooth areas in this painting. Look at it up here, it just looks so good on the background. That Imperial Purple is a really pretty paint, the way it splits out into pinkish tones as well. The Undersea Green is also incredibly granulating, as is the French Ultramarine. The yellow is also an incredibly bright colour by comparison to everything else, but it does add a nice contrast to some of the darker colours. The sap green is also quite bright as well, as is the carmine, but I did use both reds in this. In fact, I used all of the paints in it. So here's a reminder of all of the swatches I did today, and some mixes as well in the colour wheels. I can't say if I prefer the old or the new paints. There's colours in each that I really love. I think all of the sets are great, and they work so well together. I'm quite happy I have them all in my collection, and my Daniel Smith hoard grows ever larger. I'm really happy with this painting. It's one of my favourites I've done recently. I love the colours and the granulation, and I have no complaints about any of the paints that I tried today. So in conclusion, all of the sets, both old and new, are great. It really depends on preference as to whether you like the more muted colours or the brighter ones, and of course you can get individual tubes as well as the trios. So you can mix and match them to your heart's content. Let me know in the comments which are your favourite colours out of these. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful, and if you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up. You might also want to subscribe for more videos, and I do have a couple of other Daniel Smith videos that I've done in the past with some of my other paints. I can't pick between them, I love them all. I hope you're having a fabulous day, and I'll see you all again really soon in my next video. Swatch you later, bye!